Number crunching is his spirit animal, and Joe Ferreira is indebted to statistics and data, and it's helped propel him for what he does in the NFL, but also as the vice president of sports and events at LTN. And I got a feeling that as he joins me today on the Onto Something podcast, I'm Bryan Fenley. This is a sports media podcast that more so focuses on the human sides of those who work in the industry. And I work for a variety of different networks calling different sports, but this is a place designated to tell the story of Joe here in a way where maybe data is used in order to back up the story. And before we get started, as we go in a variety of different directions, this chat, don't forget to subscribe. Here's my chat with Joe. Joe, so excited to have you on here. I've had so many of your colleagues. It was only a matter of time before we got you on. Thanks for doing this.
Great to be here, Bryan.
You are somebody who's enthralled with numbers. If number crunching was a sport, I think you'd be an Olympian. How did you become so good with numbers?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure there's plenty of mathematicians that would say I'm not very good at it at all, but I probably more from my sports interest growing up, just, reading the newspaper back in the day when we had newspapers, right? Stats pages, couldn't get enough of stats, standings, schedules, scores, memorizing as much as possible. And when I got to college, I was able to kind of combine my interest in media and numbers as well, in terms of math and physics and some of those other elements as well. But it's kind of a passion of mine.
If there were stats that you would follow in terms of stats of your own life, what would be those things that you'd be most keenly interested in?
Well, just from a statistics, kind of a basic stats standpoint, I think it's really not down to numbers. I'll take your question and twist it a little bit. I've been kind of a nomad or gypsy, if you will, over time, and it kind of came from my upbringing. I was an Air Force brat. I was born in Tokyo. My dad moved a lot of different places. So, the good news, bad news is it's tough to move around a lot, especially when you're a kid, but it allows you to learn how to make new friends quickly, and also to see opportunities where they may not be. And it happened to me in my career as well. I bounced around a bunch of different companies, but all with good foundations and for good reason for the most part. So I'd say from a stat standpoint, more of a volume stat issue than a kind of a longevity at one place stat from my standpoint. But that's kind of how I look at it.
One of those places, if I'm not mistaken, that you've lived, Peru, Indiana. And I've
Yes.
looked at the population, and it's about, 11,000 people.
Yeah.
What was it like being Joe Ferreira in Peru, Indiana?
Moved there right before my junior year in high school. Went to a high school called Macanaqua, and I actually my dad was still in the Air Force, and I lived at Grissom Air Force Base. So you had Peru, which has 11,000 people, but you also had the Air Force Base. So all the Air Force Base kids went to Macanaqua High School, just outside of Peru. It's fairly small. It's about, a little over an hour north of Indianapolis, basically right in between South Bend and where Notre Dame is and Indianapolis. But it's obviously a high school basketball hotbed. People are religious about high school basketball in Indiana. So I had moved there from Maine, northern Maine. So it was quite a difference. But even though it was a small town, it was grounded, great foundational town. People cared about each other. It was a heartland, so it was actually a great place to grow up, even though it was just my last 2 years of high school, and then about 7 years of college when you combine undergraduate and graduate all in the state of Indiana.
But then, if I'm not mistaken, you went to college and you took a course a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to do that?
So I was in 2018, 2019. I ended up between jobs and looking at options. And again, going back to your first comment, being a numbers guy, I was very intrigued by data analytics and how companies were using data to make business decisions. and an opportunity came up to go to Harvard for a 9-month full-time program. Very kind of a challenging course. They use the Harvard case study method for instruction. Um, the end of it was kind of right into COVID, getting right before the COVID hit. So thankfully, I was able to finish it before we got into a lot of those challenges. But it was amazing, learning everything from Python language to supply chain management to how data is used for business and business decisions, from everything from cell phones to the distribution of equipment, and a lot of it was just kind of learning about management, learning about how data should use management, and how data should be a bigger part of how decision making is done in corporate culture. And then that obviously leads into AI, which is taking over in a lot of ways. And we did discuss that quite a bit as to how AI affects or could affect business. And we see companies now like even Disney and others trying to figure out how they can incorporate AI into their everyday business on two fronts, right? One, how can we maybe create lower, better cost efficiencies by using AI, which is, sometimes challenging, but also how can we accelerate our business by using artificial intelligence? So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, but I enjoyed the time at Harvard.
One of the things that I've noticed about you is that you're always embracing the challenge of life and whatever it throws at you. And if there was one way to describe you, it would just be this constant odyssey of always running to challenges, no matter how steep they are, always looking for outcomes, solutions, and ways to overcome. Why has that been such a common denominator of your life?
I just think I like the way I look at my career is a problem solver. Um, I've been lucky to be at a lot of great companies, and working with a lot of great, very intelligent and hardworking people. Um, but in the end, it always came down to how can you solve problems? How can I help solve problems? How can I solve them on my own? How can I help other people solve those same problems? Everything from when and I was at a company which started as Sports Line and evolved into CBS Sports Line, one of the first big sports digital websites, and now it's cbssports.com. We launched a product called March Madness on Demand in 2006, which was called a watershed moment in internet history in 2006, because it was live games that was always just on television, right? And now these games are being made available online. It was a it was a major challenge for us logistically, working with third parties, selling ads separate from what CBS Sports was selling, and I was the project leader in that, and I think that's how I saw it, as kind of problem solving. So that's kind of how I look at it, is like, what's the next challenge? I'm very curious, and I want to be able to see if I can help solve problems for whoever I'm working with.
When you were growing up and you're watching what your dad was doing, how good of a problem solver was he, and how much do you take growing up watching him and what he went through and what he was able to do, and using that as a part of yourself to this day?
Yeah, I mentioned he was in the Air Force. He was a hospital administrator. My mom was also active in the Air Force. She was a nurse. She was a registered nurse in an emergency room. And I'd say, if anybody had a larger influence on me on the problem solving side, it would be my mom, because there's no greater problem solving situation than being in a trauma center in an emergency room, and knowing, how to fix things, how to prioritize, which is always challenging, and then caring for people and coming to a good solution. So I'd say she was probably more of an impact on that than my dad, but he also, was he was an Air Force man through and through, and he was a career man, and that was how he kind of saw his life, and I followed that path, not to be in the military, but really to try to figure out what the next step is and where I can go from there.
How much are your kids following your path, and how they deviated as you look at you and your parents and the way in which you navigated your life, and then you compare what you're doing to what your kids are doing and want to do?
Well, I've got two great boys. I've got my older boy graduated from Oklahoma with an organizational management major. He has a sales background at this time, and he's frankly, looking for his next move. And I think they've got the same kind of curiosity that I had. My younger son, Sean, graduated from Virginia, UVA, and he uh, he is now in law school. He's at Denver University, actually, the hat I'm wearing right now. He's entering his second year at the University of Denver, or they call it DU, with a focus on international law, and he's also taking a sports law class at this time. So I think there's a lot of that same interest in numbers, problem solving, sports, and sports passion. There's definitely a sports passion in our family.
There's a sports passion, and obviously you have such a passion for your work. What is something that you're passionate about outside of sports, outside of work?
Travel. I think everything to do with travel. We were lucky enough to do a Mediterranean cruise a couple months ago, where we were in Rome and Barcelona and Cannes and Mallorca and Florence and Pisa. It's I just like, again, it goes back to that curiosity side, right? And so I guess they're all tied together. But I love traveling, love seeing new places, love finding new food, new history, kind of a history buff as well, going back to stats and numbers piece. But I love traveling.
Your love of history, how has that helped you in navigate your own life now, just studying what's happened in the past, and the way you use that as a tool for what you're doing today with your family, but also at LTN?
Yeah, it's just information. I'm an information holic. I think a lot of people are. The more you know, the more you're able to make decisions going forward that will affect you in a positive way. I think that's kind of how I look at it. Um, one thing that is not very is known by a select group of people on what I do is a hobby of mine, which is the NFL playoff scenarios and NFL tiebreakers. So I was lucky enough to work in the broadcasting department at the NFL in the 90s, right up to 2000. Um, and as part of that, because I had this proficiency with figuring out numbers and solutions, I was the person that would figure out if the Packers needed a Detroit Lions loss or tie and a Dallas loss to make the playoffs. And I started doing that in 1992, and I still do that today. So I'm entering my 31st year of doing that for the NFL. Just do it as a hobby. I work with a gentleman at Elias Sports Bureau, which is the official stats bureau of the NFL. And basically, we get to the end of the year. Week 13, games happen. I take my notes. I figure out the scenarios for every single team, potentially for division clinching, playoff clinching, wild card clinching, number one seed in the playoffs. Compare my notes with the person from Elias. We agree on that, and then we send it to the NFL, and that's what you see on your ticker on ESPN on the rest of the week. I bring that up because it's kind of it's not just history, but I also am on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days, right? As Joe NFL, and have a decent chunk of followers, kind of a go-to person for the networks, for teams, for a bunch of people in the NFL world as it relates to the playoff scenarios. So a lot of that is knowing the history of where it came from. A lot of that is knowing how and providing stats and history for the fans of NFL teams that last time they were able to clinch a wild card this early in the season, all those kinds of things. It's more stats, but it's a small kind of microcosm, if you will, of how history comes to be a part of what I do.
How often when you're sleeping are you dreaming about tiebreaker scenarios?
Not very. I don't dream about it, but they certainly take a lot of mental capacity when figuring them out. It's basically weeks 12 through 18 of the NFL season. Used to be 12 through 16, then 12 through 17, and now with the addition of 18th week 2 years ago, it seems to constantly change. But um, yeah, it's a lot of mental gymnastics, if you will. So sometimes it's hard to turn that off, turn that spigot off when you head to bed, or you're not handling that. But yeah, it does take a lot of mental volume. But no, I'm able to forget about it when I need to.
You as a father, what do you take most pride in what you talked about your sons and what they're doing and the effect that you've had on them and seeing them grow and how proud you are of them. What do you take yourself most pride in you as a father and your effect on them?
Well, I mean, I think to me it comes down to parenting basics. My wife and I, we've always been big believers in uh, creating good and nice and kind people. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really um, if you can instill those virtues in our sons, I think we've done our job. Then it's up to them. Frankly, we can give them all the tools, um, make it comfortable for them if we're able to do so, to be able to find the next thing they want to do. But at the end of the day, it's about being a good person in your soul and being kind to others. And I think both of our my boys are that, and I'm proud of that.
How do they show you their gratitude for you?
It's I think they're it's that you just kind of know it. They're not as verbal about it, and frankly, I'm not as verbal about it. Probably should be more so, but it's that look in their eye of appreciation. It's that look in their eye of knowing that we help them on their path, on their journey. And I think that's enough for us, right? But yeah, we're very. The good news is we're a very loving family, and we are all appreciative of each other. And frankly, they've helped me grow in a lot of ways by questioning things, by asking about, why are we doing this, or why is that something we've done, or should we really move to this new city, or do you really want to take that job? They're kind of open conversations about it, and I think that's helped along the way as well.
The idea of you being in collaboration on decision making, whether it's with the family or whether it's with work. As I wrap up this conversation with you, Joe, what do you think you take into account when decisions are made? And what is that collaboration process like for you?
Well, it all goes to me. It goes back to setting up the problem in the right way. When in terms of trying to make a decision, you need, gather the facts, right? You need the stats, right? You need going back to the beginning. You need the information, gather those facts, and then to me, I jump forward a lot of times to a desired outcome. And I say, what do we want? How do we want this outcome to be? And then how do we get there? What's the path to get to that desired outcome? And that to me has always been kind of the right approach. You don't want to work backwards because, from the outcome, outcome based decision making always isn't there. But I think forward to what I want it to be and then start back at position A and say, okay, how do we get from here to here? It might take 12 steps. It might take 2 steps. It might be a decision that's financial based. It might be a decision that is emotional based. It might be a decision that is something that I need a ton of collaboration from, or some that maybe I think I know the answer to, and it just depends on the situation and how we attack it.
It's so fascinating to peer into that psychology of everything that goes through your mind. And yeah, as we conclude this conversation, somebody as yourself who is such an enthraller, if that's a word, of stat stuffing, they should make a baseball card of you, and your resume would be on the back of it, and you'd have all these stats as far as your hitting percentage in the sport, your batting average, that is, and it would be over 400, no question about it. Joe Ferreira, thanks so much. I'm Bryan Fenley. Thanks so much for this raw, deep conversation that went in a lot of different directions. I love it.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.